The title of today's talk is around Agile analysis techniques. I actually wanted to rephrase it to just software analysis techniques, because I think it's all about just doing software development good. So the focus of my talk is to share with you a bunch of experiences that we've had in working with teams over the last couple of years, and just their journey and the problems that they faced. And hopefully out of the talk, you'll take a couple of learnings that you can apply to your team. A little bit about the company before we get started. In Reality Systems, or at In Reality Systems, we sort of venture to coach and guide and train software development teams on their journey to become masters at their craft. We've been quite fortunate to be successful with a couple of them over the last couple of years, and we believe that the essence of our success is that we try and look at software development holistically. So we look at software development beyond specific processes or beyond specific techniques and try and just help teams get good at solving their problems within their environments. What we also feel is essential to our core is that Agile sucks. We're Agile African, I'd say that Agile sucks. Oh my. Okay, I haven't been burnt at the stake yet. Now, well, let's get that right. Agile, capital A, sucks. We have a lot of people in the industry that says, we do Agile. That's like saying, well, I do fit. You can't really do fit. Or I do health. You can't really do health, but you can become healthy and you can become fit. And therefore, you can also become agile. So you can exhibit characteristics which exemplify agility. And we feel that that is essential at becoming good at software development, is strive for agility. We even go as far as to say that there is no one true way. I'll even venture as far as to say that you don't get a thing like an agile process. You don't get a thing like an agile practice. That's brave. Still haven't been burnt at the stake. We believe that if you can apply pretty much any process and any practice, and if you strive to the values and the principles that's laid out in the Agile Manifesto, and that's also the practices that's laid out in Lean, you will become good at software development. It will help you kick ass. I quite recently built a house, and if I just applied some of those principles to building a house, I would have been better at building my house. So those principles are fairly rock-solid things that if you start striving to them, you will become better. The most essential one is experimentation for us. Looking back at how well you did something, experimenting with options, experimenting with solutions, and trying to solve problems. Tying it to Dave Hussman's talk earlier, trying to find those gravity wells, those little things that's keeping you back, the waste that you see within your environments. And experiment around those things. And sometimes you're going to get it wrong. So I don't need all my slides to do the talk, it just enhances the conversation. So it's about 11 teams over 5 companies, and yeah, you can switch this on, please. The first team, some of them are quite small. For one, geospatial sort of business intelligence startup with about 5 developers. Another one, Everlytic, who's basically done all the email that you guys got for the conference. Another company, OneLaw, which has got about 30 developers. And also Standard Bank eMarkets, which is a fairly massive team that we've been working with, amongst others. And across these companies, all of them had the same challenge. All of them seem to struggle with Agile, with analysis and planning techniques. In fact, if I look back in my entire career, that is probably the one place where people struggle the most, is that forbidden word, getting requirements right. So the talk today is very much focused around our experiences with that. Okay, I'm just skipping the slide because now it's disjointed. So this is their journey, and by no means have they come to the sort of end of their journey. They'll always be on this journey because the market around them will always be adapting. So this is just their experiences as we've gone along. Now there's a slide of a retrospective board. Maybe I'll show it to you. So retrospective board. So this is what we've used in teams to help teams optimize. A retrospective board, what we call it. And that's just a place where people can come together and scratch things and scratch metrics and write problems down as and when they happen. And then once a week, we're trying to have very profound conversations around them. So this is the feedback that we've gotten out of those retrospectives as we've gone along with the teams. Is there not anyone that works for the conference that can help us?
Yeah, can we steal the feed for that projector?
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Where's my Twitter?
Do the thing Right. So our story begins. Who here has ever heard that the dev team always does it wrong? Yeah? Who here has ever heard that the business always changes their minds? Yeah. Or that the business team isn't available to answer our questions? Okay, so because I'm running beta software, everything now crashed. Everything's going great. Start singing the Lego movie song. So everything is awesome. So we've all heard that within environments, that business doesn't understand software development, and the software development teams always get it wrong. And whether the company is 5 people or 50,000 people, we see that problem is fairly prolific throughout the industry. It's quite simple. People aren't having profound conversations about the problems that they're trying to solve together. That doesn't happen. So the Agile Manifesto talks about people sitting together and having conversations and face-to-face conversations and all of those things. So that is probably the biggest way to solve that problem. In the absence of that, you have to manage it. So what a lot of people say is that the business owner isn't available, so they can't give us the answers. Well, then get them to proxy off their decision making to someone within their departments, maybe head of operations or a super user or someone that can proxy off that acceptance of the work and feeding the information through. But it must be someone within the business that understands the business problems that they're experiencing. That is essentially where your product owner should be. Scott Ambler once said on his blog, and I think he removed it when he joined IBM for some reason, that BA is Band-Aid if those people are within the IT department. Because that means IT is trying to take ownership of someone else's problem, and that breaks. So just focus around that and experiment around that. The biggest and most successful way of solving that problem is to get a person in business to either proxy off that or just take ownership of the problem. Okay, cool. I think it's behaving very
Keystone
well.
effect.
Okay, can we just, thank you. That should be sufficient.
Real-time pairing.
Okay, cool. That doesn't help for nerves, by the way. So, one of the other things that we've seen within environments, let me show you what you've missed. You saw that slide. There's the cool retrospective board. So one of the things that we see a lot in environments is that there's typically multiple processes for getting work accepted into the team's sort of backlog. I'm not going to use sprint backlog, but let's call it the sprint backlog, or their immediate next up pieces of development. And it's typically, we will push these things through as in incidents. We'll push them through as production issues. And then they push through enhancements to the system, and they push through reports, and they start pushing through projects, and this thing starts tearing open, and eventually everything just goes through that, and it's complete chaos. Now, the problem is that in these organizations, they usually put all this procession, I'm not saying that procession is right, but they put that procession down to support the processes within that organization, to support a level of quality that they desire from their projects. So the first thing that we do within companies is just to set a common denominator for what the processes are for new work. And then from there on we start optimizing. Otherwise it becomes a chaotic mess. The only thing that we then handle as incidents, essentially, is the proverbial poo hitting the fan. So, and this has been very successful within teams because it helps them start getting a place where they're optimizing from. It helps them getting a hook from where they optimize. So it means, we'll be a little bit less agile, but it also means that we're going to have an easier problem to solve. So further on within the environments, we typically see that releases are too bulky. Like they become too big. That's one of the biggest problems. Big projects, especially in large companies, there's this project. The project gets launched, and then as the project goes along, every stakeholder starts adding multiple objectives to those projects. So the first thing that you can do within your environment is just simply break those objectives apart and have one project for one objective. And then from there on, start breaking those projects into their different features. Those phases start becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And at some point, you're going to get to a place where your stories are still going to be fairly big. you're still going to find that the stories may take a couple of weeks or a couple of months to get implemented. And then people start talking about the car analogy. Who's heard the car analogy? You know, you build the wheel, and then you build the engine, and then you build the door, and you get every single piece into production. So that's one of the things that continuous delivery speaks of a little bit. So you have your feature toggles and so forth. And that's okay, but you're not bringing value to the business. It still takes too long to get those features out. And then, excuse me, I just want to... all the excitement around having a broken projector. So then people find that so we're getting stuff into production, and we're testing it, and we're minimizing technical debt, but we still find that things take too long. And then the concept of minimal viable product becomes essential within the teams. Who here knows what a minimal viable product is? Okay, minimal viable product is, I'm just going to use Spotify's little analogy that's been circling on Twitter. If we need transport, let's not build a car, let's start with a skateboard, right? And that is better than walking, but it's still not the car. So at least we have something, and we're rolling out something to the environments and to our clients as we're moving along. And that helps. And maybe it's an indirect route, but so we will iterate towards getting to the end. As Dave Husman said earlier, you know, it's 5%, getting 100% done, or 5%, and then moving on to the next step. So I like that skateboard analogy, and it's been very effective for our clients. So the one client specifically does very complex legal processes and calculation around finances for sort of acquisitions and sort of creditors type of stuff. Very complex logic, I'm not going to explain it all. And in the one business process that they had, there was about 40 different flows that they had to implement. Now 40 flows is a lot, right? So for them to implement all 40 of those flows, it would have taken them months and months and months of development. And that was the smallest functional decomposition thingy that they could do. So we said, well, let's go into production with only the sort of 20% flows that will give us 80% of the results. It was more accurately, it was 20% of the flows, or 25% of the flows that gave us 90% of the results. And that worked great. And then there came a day where we realized, oh, this thing's not working anymore. There came a day when we realized, oh crap, we didn't handle all the cases. We're now having issues in production where those edge cases are starting to occur. But that was fine. It was fine because the team knew that those things were going to come along. So in some cases, they would manually handle those things. And in other cases, they would write the logic for that there and then in a sort of just-in-time fashion. And that worked exceptionally well. Now think about the story a little bit. It took the team about 6 weeks to implement the set of features initially, and that brought value to their business immediately. If they went and implemented all 40 of those processes, or all 40 of those flows, they would be developing 6 months later. And quite an interesting thing is, in the time that we've been live, something interesting happened. About 7 of those flows that we haven't developed yet, the logic and the understanding of those things changed dramatically. So the team would have been chasing their own tail anyways if they handled it as a big bang. So the MVP is fine, and sometimes you have to take some calculated risk. This is my presentation now because nothing's working. So Weir is in a big organization. Now what I mean by big organization is about 10,000 people, or 1,000 people or more. Okay. Fair amount, about 40%. So you guys all know all about heavy documentation, right? Yeah. BPMN. Yeah, UML main. So the one organization that we were dealing with had BPMN level 1, BPM level 2, BPM level 3, and they were doing all of those analysis, creating all of those flows, because they wanted to do impact analysis on a fairly large scale. And that was good. They were maybe doing a little bit too much. Then they also had use cases and they had activity flows. They actually duplicated their activity flows in words and in the activity diagrams, which was a bit crazy. And then they had technical designs for class diagrams, ERDs, TC. When you see where I'm going with this, there's a lot of documentation. So in we came and we said, well, let's look at what of these artifacts that people are creating is actually adding value to the conversation. And we sort of made a couple of mistakes. In some stages we had too little, in some cases we had too much. But at some stage we got to a point where we oscillated just to exactly what they need to do their jobs effectively within their organization. It basically ended up being sort of one series of BPMN diagrams because the business architects needed to have conversations with the different business divisions within that organization. So that worked quite well. We ended up having a series of user stories for teams, which substituted the use cases because they're a bit more personal and they focus more on the problem. And then also scenarios to give us testable flows, essentially. And everything else, we said, well, we'll just put that stuff into the code, and the code serves as our documentation. And that worked quite well, at least on paper, right? No, it actually worked quite well. And so as time progressed within this environment, we saw something funny happen within our planning sessions and within our sort of elicitation sessions. We saw that people started having funny conversations. They started talking a lot about the templates that they were completing. Right? Who's ever had that? Like a lot of templates that they're completing within their environment. Like, no, you should complete the template in this way, and you should complete the template in that way. And we said, like, people, let's forget about the templates. Leave the templates at the door. Let's focus more on the conversation on what the needs are of the product owners. And the product owners came and they started telling the people, this is exactly what you want, what we want. We want a screen that does this and that and the other. And that's problematic because the development teams don't get to an understanding of what the problems are that they're solving. So now it's only one or two people, the product owners and the people that they're interacting with, that has an understanding about the problems. And the dev teams don't have it. So all they can do is shut up and blindly following orders, right? And that's probably one of the biggest reasons that the dev teams end up implementing the wrong things for the product owners. So we had a moment of epiphany, right, within these early environments. We started focusing the conversations on why do we need this? What is the value behind it? Ask why 5 times, like a 5-year-old, until you get to the money. Right? It's quite funny. A lot of the product owners say, no, but we don't always do things for fundamental financial impact for the company. It's like, well, then we probably shouldn't be doing those things in the first place. And then when we understand what the problem is, let's start figuring out how do we know that we've solved that problem successfully. Change the conversation dramatically. And then you see magic within the environments. So the documentation is left at the door. Right? We don't even touch those things. We just have profound conversations around the problems that we have within the environments. And then after the fact, people go and create their user stories and they go and create the test cases. And things work exceptionally well within those companies. For the first time, developers started implementing very accurately. The number of enhancements that we saw within the test environments dropped down off dramatically. So, as teams became more nimble when they're delivering, we saw this interesting problem. We saw that regression testing started causing a lot of pain for our product owners. So, what I mean by regression testing is just accepting the work and making sure that the system doesn't break when we go out into production. Why was it a pain? Well, a lot of the environments we went from deploying every 3 months to deploying every week, to deploying every day, to deploying multiple times a day. So very, very quickly, the regression testing became aggravated within the environments. So we started speaking to our product owners and said, part of the reason we're asking you to tell us how we know the problem is solved is that we can get scenarios together, those given when thens, to figure out, this is how we know the tests that we've implemented this stuff successfully. Let's use those things to start automating the sort of acceptance of the work in the environment. And they sort of said, yeah, we don't really see how that can help us. And the dev team then went and, one of the places where the dev team felt a lot of pain was over maintenance weekends. Now, maintenance weekend, just to give you context, is many environments, weekend where they shut down the servers, essentially, they do a bunch of patches and those type of things. And when things come back up and running, the development teams usually had to do a whole bunch of testing. So in those environments, we started writing automated tests for those. And now suddenly, the product owners turn around and say, why is the development teams not here over the weekends while we're suffering to do all of this sort of post-deployment checks or the post-maintenance weekend checks? They said, well, we started building these tests. And suddenly they became interested. So a couple of them, not all of them, started turning around and saying, teach us this capybara and cucumber and gherkin magic, and teach us how we can start automating our tests and how we can make things better for ourselves. And now we actually have product owners in our environments writing cucumber tests with our teams. Obviously, they're not writing all the extensions that we're building on capybara, but they're writing all the supporting things around them. And that's working exceptionally well. It's working exceptionally well. Another interesting story which is related to this is another environment. The dev team said, we think it will help us if someone comes in and does some UI testing for us. They're the product owner, he's sort of the CEO of the company, and he built a regional system. But he couldn't always do enough acceptance testing. So they got someone in to just focus on that and write a bunch of automated tests. And they saw something interesting. They saw that the number of enhancements that they got within the system during development went up by about 5 times. That was shocking. But they also saw that the number of enhancements that were coming out of production went down by about 5 times. So it meant that they were picking up the problems much earlier on in the process. And then we could start iterating on why those enhancements were happening in the first place. So it's important to measure your metrics. So here tracks velocity in their environment, just for interest's sake. A couple of people, about 10%, less. So in these environments, as I said, we try to get measure on a weekly basis because people deliver at different cadences. And one thing that we saw that was interesting is that velocity seemed to go up and down. So some teams, it would be fairly solid for 2 or 3 weeks, and then suddenly it would dip. Some teams, it would be very erratic. Some teams, it would be up 1 week, down another week. We started assessing that problem a little bit deeper, and we realized there were 2 things that was going wrong. When the teams got work, they sort of said, we have work, and we work as hard as we can, and then they burn out. And then velocity drops. That's sort of like someone learning to drive for the first time. You see this car sputtering down the road, right? Like full accelerator, and then like engine freaks out. So all we told the teams is just take the foot off this accelerator a little bit, and you'll get a bit more flow. And that worked for a couple of teams. One of the other things that we did in the environments was we realized that the teams ran out of work. So where they were planning way too far into the future previously, they were planning like 6 months to a year into the future previously, they were only planning a couple of weeks into the future now. So the planning horizon was too narrow, so the teams would run out of work the whole time. So all we did was we increased the planning horizon a little bit, and then suddenly velocity stabilized. So those are further things that you should experiment with. So everything was going well, sunshine and roses, and as things went along, we realized that we tend to have very long discussions within our planning sessions, within our analysis sessions, around the user stories within our environment, especially now that we lengthened our planning horizon. So we did something simple. We said we will time box our discussions to 4 minutes per story. If we can't get to an understanding of the story within 4 minutes, it either means that the story is too big, or it means that we don't understand the story. So it means that there are other stories that we can go on with, that we have an understanding with, and let's not have this one story impede the process. That just help things flow a little bit, and we could handle those stories as sort of edge cases and make sure that they don't impede us overall. That worked quite well. I'm sure a lot of people would have different opinions about that. Now, having these discussions all throughout the developers week started becoming a mess. We started having about 12 hours of planning discussions, and because we were very reactive on how the team was delivering and how things were flowing, we realized that sure, we're having planning sessions like 3 or 4 times a day throughout in these environments, and that killed developer productivity. So we went into a retrospective and we started speaking a lot about these problems. And the one team suggested, I still cringe when I say this, but I'm still going to say it. The one team suggested, let's plan for 1 week and develop for 2 weeks. And I said, let's not do that, please. The other team said, well, let's 2 developers plan this week, and then the others code, and then the next week we'll do it. And that's also a bit cringeworthy. Then we had further conversations, and we came to a very workable solution where we said we will disallow meetings in the environment after a certain time in the day. Right? It would take an act of God, essentially, to have a meeting after that point. So the God being the CIO. And that worked quite well. So it gave developers a clear runway. So it also meant that developers knew that they wouldn't write code before 10 a.m. in the morning or before 9 a.m. in the morning. So they would use that time to enrich themselves, do research, get up to date with technology, do code katas, do all of those wonderful things that make developers happy in their life, over and above the planning. What we also did in those environments is we said 1 day a week, we will just have sort of like meetings and sessions and those type of things. So on Fridays, we would have our retrospectives, our review meetings, and obviously any planning meetings, especially if we had to have very in-depth planning sessions, or sort of design sessions or so forth. And that was interesting because the Friday only ended up taking about 3 hours of sessions. So what the team inevitably started doing is using that time also for code katas and hackathons and solving profound problems that they identify within their environments. Things that the product owners don't necessarily look at as important in their world, like optimizing server infrastructure, optimizing their build processes, playing with new and different languages to solve things for them. And that was magical because the developers started solving massive problems in their environments. The one example was the team had to buy a 1 million rand caching device for it's a mass email company, which you guys are probably all users of. So, because you're at Agile Africa and you got mail from them. So that 1 million rand device was a massive investment for the company. They actually didn't really have the money for that. And the one developer said, I know of a thing that I've got this hypothesis, I'm just going to go and experiment with something. And for a couple of hackathons, week after week, he was playing around and he actually found a way to optimize the code and they didn't have to make that expenditure. Because they were having fun solving the problems that they've always felt was in the environment. Another cool thing is, you guys know what YOLO is? If you only live once, #YOLO. But the one developer created no YOLO as a committing thing. So every time a developer commits, no YOLO would kick in and check, if the code wasn't brought under test. And the guy that reduced the coverage or made the code worse, or reduced the coverage is a bad word, but made the code worse, would then have to buy coffee for everyone. Quite fun. I've got my reservations about that. So things went along and the team was very happy, and we felt that we were really getting to a high degree of agility within these companies. And I came to the teams and I said, are we still at our best? Are we still performing at our best? We have a lot of meetings in the environments. And there's still funny discussions going on. What can we do to make things better? And the one team suggested, let's start running mini retrospectives within our environment. So every time we do something that we feel is time-consuming or potentially wasteful, we'll just look back and say, did we do this thing well? Did we actually need to do this thing at all? As opposed to having that once a week or once every 2 weeks. Do that whenever we're doing a repetitive task. And what was interesting coming out of that was a new rule in the environment. We said that every meeting in the environments are completely elective. So every single meeting is optional, except of course your performance review, because that's no, I'm just kidding. We're Agile, the team does your performance review, remember? I'm just kidding. So, every meeting is elective. And then people said, well, but what if people don't care? What if people don't care and they don't come to the meetings? So, well, you'll pick up that they're regularly not coming into meetings and you'll have a conversation around that. But, what if they only come to certain meetings and they don't come to my meetings? And so, well, maybe they don't care about your problems. Maybe they care about their problems more. So that was very interesting. And that's a very interesting experiment that we've run within environments with different levels of success. Right? Because the people that actually don't care, that becomes very evident very, very quickly. So, every time I look there, I cringe because it's like Franken slides. So something interesting happened further in one of the environments. We were running for a couple of months, things were going well, and then I started having a conversation with the one team, and we realized that the piece of work that they were working on specifically, they've had enhancement after enhancement for a period of about 7 months. Who's ever had that? Where there's enhancements coming in on this piece of code or system the whole time. A lot of people? Yeah, some shake, some not. So hopefully this will help you. I think this. I'm going to try and wrap up. I know we're running a bit late. So, in that environment, these enhancements was actually starting to counter each other. So one enhancement would come in and it would be the complete opposite of the other enhancement. And what we realized was the team actually never took a step back to understand what the problem was that they were trying to solve. And it was usually because there was a piece of legacy code or an old subsystem that didn't really have proper stories originally or any specs or anything like that. So what the team actually ended up doing is taking a step back and looking at what this piece of system was supposed to do in the first place. And when they did that, they realized that they're trying to do the wrong thing with the system. They also noticed that the system isn't actually solving the problem that it was intended to solve initially. So that's throughout that system. So sometimes you have to take a step back, especially when you don't have legacy in the environment, you don't have the old stories, the thing isn't under test. Take a step back and just understand what this thing was supposed to do in the first place and then sort of revert from there. So I've got about 3 slides left, so I'll wrap up very quickly. So what is profound for me that happened in these environments is because for the first time in the company's history, the developers understood what the business was about, what the problems were that they were solving for the business. The developers could take a step back, they could look at the business, they could look at their systems, and they could see inefficiencies in the way the business was doing things. So they could effectively start counter-optimizing the business. One of the examples was a product owner and a developer was working one day and they noticed that just by a small tweak, they're able to increase the profitability of the company by like 100,000 Rand. So the CEO gave the developers and the product owner each like 10,000 Rand just for that, which is quite cool. More deeply than that is, quite recently, the one developer was in the space where there was like this daily batch job that ran, a cron job that ran. And in that space, he noticed that this is to reconcile payments, and every day there would be a whole call center that makes follow-up calls whether or not payments were made. So he basically just made that job run every 5 minutes because we're in a new world and payments happen a lot quicker than what they did previously. So that organization now saved per day about 200 to 300 hours of call center time, not following up unnecessary payments. I don't know what reward that guy's going to get because he made a couple of people's jobs, obviously. But there is the opportunity to counter-optimize. So in closing, starting to close off, we're not all there yet. These environments are all still learning. And if any one of you ever come to those environments and see how they're doing things, by all means, come and look and give us suggestions, and everyone's open to improving. And I think the essence is that you, like a jazz band, you should always move with what's happening around you. You should always experiment, and you should always improvise on what's happening. You shouldn't ever say, well, we've reached nirvana now. We're like 100% Scrum compliant, and therefore life is good. We should always adapt to our surroundings and use what works, even if what works is a bit strange for you. Right? So challenge your own beliefs. So experiment with things. Don't take anything for granted. I quite recently listened to a podcast by Dave Thomas, and in there he said that we believe as an Agile community that test-driven development is absolutely core to how we should work. But challenge that. Try not testing for a couple of weeks and see what happens. I cringe when I say that. I think that's so unnatural. But allow yourself to experiment like that. So leave those preconceptions at the door. And through that, you may actually start surprising yourself a lot more. Thank you very much. I think we're obviously over because we started over. So just come and ask questions here while I'm back. Thank you very much.